SlideShare, go ahead and connect with me there. It's usually just through LinkedIn or however they do it. But this session will also be recorded if you'd like to use it for any reason, and I'll be pushing it out to Big Virtual Me TV, which is inside the link that I sent you in the chat window at bit.ly/bvm-tv. And so this, as well as a lot of other content, will all be posted there so that you can check it out and have the chance to use it. So with that, we'll go ahead and kind of get started. This is a fairly quick session. Again, the European announcements usually are much more compressed than the announcements that we do inside of the U.S. It's a slightly smaller event. One might consider it, more of an intimate gathering, but there's still a lot of stuff, and I always find that at Europe, what usually ends up happening is the stories that we hear started inside of the U.S. Announcements usually kind of get finished, or they get kind of wrapped up when we go to Europe. Last year was no different. We had a lot of new announcements around vSphere 6 and all these other cool things, and then at Europe, we heard about all of the end-user compute components. And so I think very much similar to what we're seeing here. So this is kind of a chance to create some cohesion between these announcements so that we have kind of a combined, very contiguous story to tell. So if we start by recapping where we were, and I know a lot of you had jumped on for the VMworld 2015 recap that I did with my partners Shang and Tim, and we did that during the Top Gun Tech Thursday. It was right after VMworld, so it was obviously lots of fun pulling all that together. But we talked about some conversational motioning, right? How inside of VMworld, we really presented this idea of these these high-level visions, and that included things like identity management, and it included application deployment through things like Project A2, and we talked extensively, and people were really blown away by the whole cloud-to-cloud vMotion, and there was a lot of discussion around, Photon and, the just enough VM and the small footprint and exposing containers to avoid things like, kernel-based attacks that can impact an entire kernel and thus an entire workload in the applications that live inside of those containers. And then one of the things that we did during that conversation is that we tried to find points of correlation. And some of the simpler points of correlation, how does this apply? How does this high-level vision apply to our SMB and commercial customers today? SMB mom-and-pop shops and even the commercial customers are not necessarily going to be talking about things like cloud-to-cloud vMotion and Photon and containerization of applications right out of the gate. But they do need to be able to prepare for it, and we as technical professionals need to be able to communicate the value of these high-level visions and what they're doing today to connect to those high-level visions. So we talked about the changes inside of Horizon 6.2. We talked about the changes inside of vRealize Ops 6.1. We talked about the new changes and enhancements with NSX 6.2 and the integrations with vSAN 6.1. And then we also introduced some new stuff around Evo and Evo SDDC. And granted, that again is a very sophisticated technology, but if you look at all of these at the bottom, these are really kind of foundational building blocks, and the only thing that could conceivably sit below these is really just vSphere, right? So if we see we're creating sort of this iterative journey. So this is where we were inside of VMworld 2015. Take customers that are sitting at vSphere, how do we motion them into Horizon and Ops and NSX and vSAN and hyperconvergence, and then motion them even further into identity management, application deployment advances, cloud-to-cloud vMotion, and containerization. So that's, at least for me, that's the way I kind of see this picture progressing. So in Europe, what we did was we added another layer of abstraction. And inside of this space, we're really putting the focus on automation and biz ops. And this is coming to us through vRealize Automation and vRealize Business, which was formerly known as ITBM. And so vRealize Automation and vRealize Business are both getting ratcheted up. This is a major version for them. A lot of the other stuff below, right? Horizon, Ops, NSX, these were all dot releases. So we're talking feature or fix. We're talking points of integration. But inside of Automation and BizOps, for vRealize Business, these are major releases. These are both getting ratcheted up to 7.0. So what are these doing? These are really attaching us back to this picture of, the whole ready for any, which I think that, if I kind of look back at that statement, and if I had thought about it the way that I'm thinking about it now when I first heard it, I probably wouldn't have wrestled with it, with the logic quite so much. It's really just ready for all, and any equals all. And I think I had that conversation with somebody on this call while we were out at VMworld. But it's saying, any could be fine, on-premise, off-premise. It could be two different clouds. It could be, end-user compute and DAS and on-prem. Just basically anything you want to throw at it, that's the any, right? And so inside of this space, the one thing that is critical is the cloud management platform. So, today we're not going to really be getting into, operations too much because we talked about that. And actually, I sent out a video, and it's on the playlist here with this video as well on Big Virtual Me TV on YouTube that goes over some of the technical highlights for vRealize Ops 6.1, including the custom data centers and all of these new cool things that we can do with stretch cluster management and all of that. But today we're going to put our focus and attention around, like I said, the automation and the business ops or vRealize Business, because without those, we really have kind of a fragmented story. We've got, hybrid cloud, we've got virtual infrastructure, compute, network storage, and physical attachments, and then we're going, we're kind of jumping right into applications and end-user computing, and we're not seeing a way to provide extensibility. And it's through ops, automation, that we're able to provide these senses of extensibility. And this takes us into this kind of grander platform picture where we can look at being able to service cost, agility, and optimization through all of these. Cost through business. After all, if we, when we're talking to customers, it's really great to be able to say, oh, hey, this is how much your infrastructure is being consumed, and this is how long that's going to go on for, and this is when you're probably going to need to buy stuff. But unless you can apply some sort of biz ops rationalization to that to say, if you did this, this would impact it in this way, then really all you've got is a bunch of anecdotal information. I mean, yeah, you can act on it, but you don't know how to act on it. You don't know what your options are. The same is true for cloud platforms. People pick up a line card or a rate card with a cloud platform provider, and it says you're going to consume these resources at this rate, and if you consume too much, you're going to have this surcharge. But how do you know what happens if you reswizzle your workloads and do something different with it? This is where vRealize Business kicks in and allows us to service cost. And then we service agility through automation, the ability to scale and to be able to deploy entire data centers with one button click. So with that, let's start talking about automation first. So automation updates inside of vRealize Automation 7. So again, this is a major release. So previously, if you were familiar and if you've ever done a deployment for vRealize Automation, the one thing you would know is in version 6, it was not intuitive. Right? It was, I remember declaring my major for cloud automation, and I went to my first boot camp like a year or so ago, and we went through and deployed vRealize Automation. I think it was 6.1. And, I walked out, and got in my car, after that week, and I was like, man, what did I sign up for? Because it was, okay, you got to unwind, you got to release these bindings from this server, and I mean, it was a thing, man. And so consequently, things like proof of concept, ease of deployment, having somebody just grab the technology and take a look at it was a little bit harder to do than we would really want. And so we're seeing a huge change as we move towards 7. For one, orchestration, right? The vRealize orchestration appliances and those components, those have now been integrated into automation. So those have now been pulled into the automation appliance. The reason we're doing that is because orchestration and application integration really needs to be inherent to the automation story. Because after all, how often do you deploy a system workload and you don't deploy an application in it, right? It's just a dummy workload sitting there. That never happens. You deploy something so that it can run something. That's its whole reason for being. Another thing was, data store appliances. Right, and these are the appliances in the spaces where, like the DEM workers are going to be assigned. And so with those have also been migrated inside of the appliance. And you'll see here we have 2 appliances. That's because what we're showing you is the difference in what redundancy looks like. So what we're building out is something redundant. And then lastly, we had the need for an identity appliance. So you had to deploy an identity appliance, and you had, a hot and a cold identity appliance sitting there. And so we've even done away with that. So now all of the identity management for vRealize automation is resident inside of the appliance. So from an architectural perspective, we've gone from this vision of having multiple machines to, having the appliance, and then you're going to run out, and this appliance will be this appliance will be the bit that will connect out to the IaaS server, and then the IaaS server is what connects us to vCenter to actually make the calls to build out the machinery. So you can see how this has really streamlined things, because before, when we had all of these bits living just inside of the automation space, we had lots of issues regarding, NTP, time sync, resolution, FQDN resolves for the different machines, and it got very, very sticky. But now this should make proof of concept a lot easier. And then in addition, we have also provided for an automated wizard-based deployment. So basically what happens is all of the Windows components, all of the logging, all of the VRA pieces, whether you say, hey, you know what, I'm just doing a little minimal deployment, proof of concept, kind of pokey puppy, getting people started, or maybe I'm doing like an enterprise deployment where, inside of the enterprise space, you can see here how it's diagrammed out. It lets you say, okay, well, how many, vRealize appliances, how many IaaS web servers. So really, you can just take the white papers for scale and say, okay, well, if I'm doing this many machines, this is how much I need. And you just click the drop-down box and say you need this many. And it's even going to give you like that little outline of architecture over there, which I think is just kind of more of a static idea. And then you can assign the server roles that you need to the servers that are being deployed. Whether, if you're talking enterprise class, whether you're doing, proxy servers, which servers are going to create the DEM workers and all of that. But for your basic minimal deployments, it's really just a radio box, and then all of this becomes a moot point. And again, like I mentioned, getting rid of the additional identity manager or the identity appliance, so we don't have to integrate that identity appliance anymore. We don't have a separate virtual appliance. It's embedded right inside of VRA. So the VRA contains the auth services, because before we had it sitting externally, and then we'd have to point Active Directory at it. So now once the appliance is joined to Active Directory, then you should have a pretty clear shot to open up a tenant and drop in a authentication store so that you can deal with all of your auth-z and auth-n work right inside of automation. And it also has some new enablement capabilities, right? Full out-of-the-box branding. Before this was, it wasn't hard, but it was still, you had to crack open a cascading style sheet, a CSS, and you have to twist that around. And we also didn't have support for like multi-factor, authentication and smart cards and all of that. And now that's being baked in here. And we can also apply multiple domains to a single tenant. This would be a great use case if someone says, hey, you know what, I want to be able to kind of subdivide what I'm getting out of vRealize automation into kind of multiple subtenants or give people multiple points of domain access. That'd be one way you could do that. You can also go the other way and provide a single domain to multiple tenants. So this, I think, gives us a lot more flexibility in the way people are going to use the technology. This I am crazy excited about. Anyone who ever saw me demonstrate vRealize automation saw me create blueprints. One of the things I always did, because it's like, hey, you need to see how you create machines. And the blueprinting process was really very dialogue-based. It was select your machine, select your your snapshot, select how this machine's behave, put in how much it's supposed to cost, and it was very dialogue-based. And multi-machine blueprints were really no better. It was you got to create some single machine blueprints, and then you got to slap them into the multi-machine blueprint, and give them all names and try to remember which one's which. Now we have a design canvas. So this unified blueprint design canvas allows us to drop in machines, infrastructure, network, security, even orchestration. So if you have like orchestration, a great example would be one that's given here, where we've got software license verification as an orchestration action that exists inside of this space. So you can deploy a actual server, and then you can also deploy the application that lives on that server so that it plays with the others, and then also create dependencies between these points so that once this gets deployed and loaded, it will go ahead and it will check for software license verification. And all of this, again, is done with one click. But it gets even cooler because we can also support nested multi-machine blueprints. So now you're looking at this blueprint and you're saying, well, that's really great, but I got to deploy this machine and this machine, and yeah, I've got this machine connecting to this network segment, and this machine's connecting out to this network segment, and all of these cool things. But what if I've got like, a three-tiered app that's already there that needs to feed this? Well, that's not a problem anymore. You can actually drag on an entire other multi-machine blueprint, and that multi-machine blueprint with its own, with its own networking, with its own, segmentation and dependencies and everything else it's got. And then you can create dependencies and workflows into, these other systems and applications. And yes, you can orchestrate the start and stop order of machines just using those dependency clicks. So without having to, orchestrate it in, and have to write down notes of which machine's starting first, you can actually just build it on this canvas. Now, the only time this is going to be evident is when you're building machinery. But what's even cooler is that this will also be an exportable file, and we'll talk about that here in a minute too. So one of the big deals, and I think when we're communicating this out to customers and we're doing demos and talking about it, is that we have to, again, make sure that it's relevant to them. So one of the ways I think is easy to communicate this is say, okay, well, why does this matter? So this matters because we're moving away, and we have moved away from a paradigm where we had these monolithic, data ideas, right? We had server, storage, compute, network, and it's just bottom to top. That's how we did it. And we've moved into a space where this is kind of more what we think about when we think about virtual data centers. We've got, software-defined networking, software-defined storage. We've got compute. We've got, some automation or some scripting. Maybe even it's just, host profiles, whatever. Hell, that could even just be cloning, right? Snapshotting, some very pedestrian thing that we do now that, 10 years ago was crazy exotic, right? And then we've become more comfortable with the ideas of edge security for, these workloads and these types of placement. But now we're kind of zooming out as we look into like cloud scale, and these types of things are becoming much smaller. And we're finding the need to take these and to be able to replicate them at significant scale. And to be able to do so without worrying about the security of the individual machine, right? Because we're zooming out and we're not able to see what's going on inside of every single one of those little workloads all the time, without having to worry about running out of VLANs, right? If we're only given 4094 to play with, it's pretty quick to see how fast we can run out of those. So how do we integrate things like NSX? How do we integrate things like forms of automation and making sure that all this is secure? How do we make sure that we're not dealing with layer 2 broadcast collisions because all of these different workloads are using the same IPs? And these are the kind of scale issues that customers, they might not be talking about 1,000 different individual data centers at once, but they're certainly going to maybe be talking about maybe a dozen. At least if they're getting into this space where they're talking about automating stuff, even if nothing more than just inside of development environments or inside of the tenancy they have within their own departments and geos, right? So then we look at simplification of this process. You can see I took those microcosms, I dropped a couple in here, and let's say those represented like multi-machine blueprints or existing workloads. And now with vRealize 7, we can now attach those existing workloads and nest them alongside other individual workloads, individual VMs, and attach things like load balancing, firewalling, switching, and routing so that we can apply some layer of simplicity and replication and still provide security between these points so that we can scale it out as big and as crazy as we want. And a lot of this comes to us courtesy of this idea of the unified blueprint. This is going to make architecting and designing this stuff so much easier. And like I said, it's not just machines anymore. It's also network services and security services and also, the XaaS. So anything that you can build inside of Orchestrator is also within this. So you don't have to just be limited by just saying, I got to put out a machine and then somebody's got to go deploy the code into the machine. I mentioned that NSX is getting integrated. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the deeper points of NSX integration, but really we're now able to provide microsegmentation not just at the system, but now down to the application level. And this also extends to conversations about what we're doing with AirWatch and VPN level microsegmentation. There's a lot that's happening with microsegmentation beyond just the distributed firewall living out right at the NIC. And while for a lot of us that is still just such a new and cool concept, it's amazing to think how fast this is growing and what we're capable of doing every single day. We're also providing new lifecycle extensibility. What this really means, what it distills down to, is you can now have blueprints that span clouds so that you can actually create a blueprint that can deploy on virtual resources, physical resources, and multiple different cloud platforms, all within one deployment stroke. So you don't have to have, this is a cloud blueprint, this is an on-prem blueprint, this is a physical blueprint. Everything can be deployed and it can be intermingled. And that's because we're seeing this new level of kind of first-class endpoint, which is also something that we're introducing within vCloud. So really this extensibility just makes things more, well, I guess for lack of better words, the way they should be. The blueprints become code. I told you could export these. There's going to be communities continuing to spring up. It's already alive. And all these blueprints can be exported as YAML code. And all that YAML can be imported by a client. And consequently, clients can do the same thing. They can contribute to it. So this is all totally interoperable with the vRealize automation user interface, and they can also do imports, exports into different tenants or different instances of VRA. So they can get things from the community or they can design their own stuff, and they can create all sorts of neat ways to communicate their blueprints out there. before version 7, we had some functionality that existed between NSX and automation. Really, that functionality, if you kind of scratched in at it, it was really more about VXLAN and about the packet encapsulation. And that's what was happening, so that we could have multiple IP layer 2 segments running next to each other. But beyond just placing machines on those segments, it really didn't go a lot further than that. But in version 7, we're now seeing increased functionality for switches, so that you can now have virtual switches included inside of blueprints and workloads, as well as routing, firewalling, and logical load balancing. So basically, it's full NSX integration inside of automation. So anything that you could imagine you could do with a physical data center, you can now do inside of a blueprint, and it will all get deployed in time. I mentioned the improvements around first-class endpoints. So before, you had to have the endpoint URL, and then you had to have the tenant identification, all this stuff. You had to go back and forth between vCloud and automation and EC2 and automation and Azure and automation to try to get all this figured out. Now we have the first-class endpoint, so you can just drop in the URL, and then it will figure out the abstraction. It'll tell you what resources are available, and at that point you can just effectively sort of claim those resources and march forward with your deployment. We also have some enhanced management for approvals, and because I figured this was more of a technical crowd, I wanted to include this. Basically now we can dynamically assign approvals, and we can see which approvals have gone stale. We can attach approvals to software components or machine components. Again, think back to those blueprints, and we can trigger them for new reasons. And we can also create triggers to say, well, again, if we have someone who would have done the approval, now we can automatically assign approvals to whomever their manager is. And we're doing this because we're integrating more tightly with the authentication stores that live inside of the customer's environment. So basically, if Bob starts a new job and he is there and he's reporting to Ken, then every time he requests a machine, it's going to bubble it up to Ken, and Ken's going to have to approve it. But then when Bob moves over and he starts reporting to Mary, then you don't have to do anything inside of the blueprint. All of his approvals will follow him, and now everything he does has to be approved by Mary. So this means that we can kind of take that set it and forget it, do it once, and don't ever have to do it again approach to the way we're building out the approval processes and things. So moving right along, talking about vRealize business and business intelligence and biz ops inside of this space. One of the big things is we've really enhanced what vRealize business looks like. We made some changes to the PP&L, and we're making it more of a first-class citizen inside of the suites, because it really does make sense, and there's a lot of points of clear integration for it. We now have the ability to do automatic cost and consumption across clouds, and so that before they could see between the clouds, right? They could see, okay, well, this is on-premise, so this is what would happen if I took that workload and put it off-premise, or I put it to this cloud or that cloud, and they could do a comparison, but they couldn't really do like a consumption aggregation and say, what am I spending across all of my clouds? What am I spending on-prem and off-prem? And how is this forecasted on-prem and off-prem? And how can I double-click into those projections? So this is really new inside of vRealize business, the ability to create these aggregations and to get a little more quality of data granularity inside of this space. They can also get into costs and drivers. So now they can see fully loaded costs of storage, and then break it all the way down into hardware, storage demand, labor, facilities, maintenance. They can do the same thing for compute, network, and even if they're going with NSX or vSAN, it doesn't mean they're going to lose visibility. Because before, vRealize Business was very much contingent upon, okay, well, these are your physical resources, this is how you're consuming them, this is your networking, your storage. But if they were using something like virtual SAN or NSX, then they would lose visibility into it. But now NSX and vSAN are both integrated, and they make themselves visible to vRealize Business. So regardless of their networking and storage compute platforms, they're going to have line of sight into it from a forecasting and prediction perspective. We also have faster time to value. So what this basically means is that vRealize Business is going to be able to auto-generate pricing for private cloud. And they're going to be able to download this right from My VMware, and it'll auto-generate pricing based upon what it sees in the environment. But you can always override it. But at least it lets them kind of, light the fire and get some real time to value return out of this platform. In addition, they can take, the auto-generated policies that they have for, AWS, and they can even apply, surcharges or things that might be incurred. And all of this is being cycled back into the policies that live inside of vRealize Automation. So what's going on inside of Automation is that business will now be the foundational driver for populating all of these rate cards. So before, you would have to take what came out of business, and you would have to export it, import it into VRA, and again, it would work, but it wasn't quite as elegant as it's becoming. And so now, since vRealize Business is just an appliance that you point and it becomes, a tab, inside of VRA, and that's actually what the tab's going to look like right there, then, it's able to populate this content directly in. So what does this mean that we can do? Well, I think it's pretty exciting because imagine this. Imagine you've got a CFO who's updating depreciation, amortization, and cost for server and storage resources. And he's updating that, and he's making these changes and enhancements inside of something like SAP or SAP HANA. Then we can integrate those databases back into vRealize Business. vRealize Business can create the forecast and analysis for those resources, and then when Bob goes to request his resources that Mary's going to approve, it's going to show him how much those resources are going to cost. And these can be updated in real time according to the line of sight and the acumen that the CFOs and the financial officers are bringing to the table. They don't have to do it like that. They can also keep it very, very streamlined as well, but this kind of gives them kind of a quick way to run through it. We also have increased show back to line of business, so if they want to create aggregates, they can do that too, so that they don't have to worry with how they're going to speak to different lines of business inside of this space. They can aggregate what they're using and what they're forecasting use for. And then we're giving sort of bicameral support through automation so that the people that are managing these resources can see how they're being consumed, not necessarily what they're costing, but how they're being consumed so that they can make the right decisions from an infrastructure perspective. And then I kind of threw this in, this is just for fun, is that we also have, they'll also have access to a vRealize Business iPad app that will allow them to see some cool visualizations of what's going on inside of their environment. So VRB is available a couple different ways. You got standard with your, quick time to value. Basically just takes the data that it's seeing from automation and vCenter, and it reswizzles it and turns it into something that is, manageable and forecastable. And then advanced, it can pull from any data source. And like I said, some popular ones would be things like SAP or SAP HANA. And it can integrate as a SaaS offering or on-prem. It, of course, includes all the standard stuff. It's easy for people to get started with it. If you have customers that are looking at this, they've got the automation starter kit or the cloud management starter kit. And the only big difference is the cloud management starter kit includes vRealize Business And it also includes vRealize Ops Advanced. So they have operations, automation, and business all tied together. With the Automation Starter Kit, it's just automation and business. And then we've got professional services kits and SKUs already designed around this, including a advanced design and deploy core for the whole management thing, which will give them pretty much all the information they need. Really, with the additions, like I said, vRealize Business is also available as a standalone and advanced and enterprise, or it's part of the vCloud and vRealize suites inside of these additions. So really, we're talking to our customers about vRealize. It's about kind of moving them from where they're crawling and they're just looking for like cloud costing into where they're looking for showback and being able to report this into lines of business, all the way until they're able to see holistic costing for their entire financial services center and integrating with things like SAP and getting vision into their entire IT spend and how that's being projected out. So really, this is a tool that can grow with them in a lot of different ways. Now to wrap up, just some quick peripheral announcements that we made in Europe. One was the integration of Google DNS into vCloud Air, so basically allowing companies that are doing email, web, e-commerce hosting, whatever they're up to, and to be able to integrate with Google DNS so that they can make more streamlined ways of communicating and getting people routed to their sites. We also announced for our service providers out there vCloud Director 8, which has support for vSphere 6, tenant throttling so that they can proactively adjust what the SLAs are going to look like for their tenants, as well as being able to import, export machine blueprints from vRealize Automation into vCloud Director so that if they're using both tools, depending upon how they're leveraging them, they can still take advantage of the blueprints and the YAML-based export and authoring. And then we also announced vSphere integrated containers on vCloud Air, which effectively is giving access to the Photon platform so they can use the just enough VM with the instant cloning and the Photon OS, and be able to leverage this with all of the same things that are inside of vSphere, like DRS, vMotion, HADR, as well as advanced networking services so that they can protect their containers. Like I said, check the playlist. There will be a video coming out called NSX 9 Core Use Cases, I believe, that I filmed and we'll have for you guys, and it talks about the importance of microsegmentation in a containerized environment. And then the last thing we announced was Project Michigan. Project Michigan really kind of helps deliver on that cloud-to-cloud vision, and this is a tech preview. So what it really does is it allows you to deploy an enterprise gateway across vCloud Air offerings, whether it's on demand, dedicated, or even DR to the cloud. And it supports virtual machine migrations as well as network policy extensions. Now, you don't have to have NSX on-prem to use it, but if you do, you can extend those network policies directly out into the cloud. So as machines are moving back and forth, their network policies go with them. And this integrates directly with Hybrid Cloud Manager to keep it nice and simple, and that just snaps right into to the vSphere web client so that you can move machines back and forth without having to power them off. And like I said, this kind of completes the vision for the cloud-to-cloud vMotion, which I think we talk about that and the long distance that we did in vSphere 6 and being able to synchronize catalogs and stretch clusters for for vSAN and all of this, it really all starts to kind of make sense. So with that, I'll leave you with some links and some asks. Like I said, watch your emails, social media for further enablement announcements. Got probably about 6 or 7 videos that are being added to the playlist here within the next few weeks. There's, I think, one new one that went out last night on vRealize Ops 6.1's technical overview there. Got stuff around NSX, vSAN, as well as some stuff around the unified hybrid cloud story and being able to communicate that as effectively as we can. You can also check aponewsletter.blogspot.com to read the updated blog that we curate. And also, if you use Flipboard on any of your devices, you can either search for K-Groat and follow the magazines that I publish there, or you can look specifically for this link, APO Tech Mag, and put that into your browser, and it'll open up the magazine for you to subscribe. And also, if you're doing anything regarding EUC, be sure to check out VMW Demo. It gives people a test drive to our entire suite of products. And as always, be sure to follow me on Twitter for updates and enhancements. Follow the blogs. Check out the YouTube page that I put here in the chat window at bit.ly BVM-TV for more. And I'll look forward to talking to you guys soon. And with that, what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording so that we can sanitize this.